Okay, so ready to continue our little discussion here of early man. What we're talking about here is picking up our story with our species, right? And looking a little bit at our prehistory, right? What were Homo sapiens doing? Before we actually started settling in one place and doing everything else. So we're going to look a little bit at like some of our earliest life, a little bit at the process of settlement. Some of the things I'm going to deal with here happen over and over and over again around the world in very similar ways. So we're going to deal with it in more broader terms rather than getting into a lot of like specifics. I'm not going to force you guys to learn like different pottery types from different prehistoric civilizations. So we're going to deal mainly with a series of significant shifts or changes, right, that happen in what we call the Stone Age periods. Right? So here are some terms to watch for here. There are a couple on here that we will see again a bit. And it allows me to make an interesting point, too, about studying and preparing for this class. And again, how to do well in the class, something I like to try and reinforce a number of times in the first day. Studying via Google is not a good idea. Google is not your friend for classes like this. In particular, for example, if you were to type in subjection of women to Google, you're going to get a John Stuart Mill book from the 19th century about how, hey, maybe we shouldn't treat women like crap and we should let them vote and stuff. All right? Which has nothing to do with what I'm talking about here. All right? That issue comes up in my modern world class. This is a very different concept. We'll get to that late today. You guys remember what makes us most different, right? Remember standing on just 2 legs, not 4. Right? Having complex language because we got the super big brains, right? Developing tools and fire, right? All kinds of things that kind of help us out here. And with language and larger brains, we have developed complex societies, right? We do have functioning hunter-gatherer societies. People divide up jobs. People move around collectively as a unit and do things together. Right? We're going to start to see some significant changes in that, but let's take a second and make sure we understand what a hunter-gatherer society really is. Because that is actually most of our history, or our prehistory anyway. Most of the time that our species has been around. Remember, our species has been around for at least 200,000 years. And for 200,000 years, there have been no significant physiological differences. We're all still the same species, right? Which is why you can intermarry with anybody on the planet, right? You have minor physical differences, regional adaptations. Why are some people darker skinned than others? Anybody know?
The amount of sunlight that they intake?
The amount of sun, right? In the tropics, again, you don't have winter in the tropics, right? It's sunny all year round, right? So the darker skin is a massively good adaptation there, right? People with darker skin don't get sun cancer. People with light skin do, right? But the lighter skin actually helps you absorb the vitamins from the sun more efficiently, right? Because you get much less of it, and you need that vitamin D that their body produces because of sunlight, right? So that's an adaptation as well to living in far north, right, where you get less sun. See how this works out here? Right? There's no separate species. There's no the multiple genesis idea they used to say. Oh, well, they're different species. No, they're all the same species, right? And humans lived pretty much the same way everywhere in the world for 200,000 years, right? Whether you're in West Africa or in Siberia, right? You lived basically the same way. There was not a lot of there are only so many ways to live as a hunter-gatherer band, right? There are only so many things you can do. So it plays out the same way pretty much everywhere. What is gathering? Hunting and gathering. What's the gathering part?
Gathering essential things you need to survive.
What specifically here? Think about it. Well, we always put it together with hunting and gathering. So they both relate to the same basic thing. Food. Yeah, you're gathering food. So you're foraging, right? You're looking for wild stuff. What kind of foods do you think we're picking? Berries. Nuts. Fruits. Yeah. Maybe some wild grains, roots and tubers you can dig up, There's all kinds of things you can find in the wild that we can eat, right? All kinds of leafy green things. The first person to discover, lettuce, not the devil's lettuce, the actual lettuce, right? You can eat lettuce. People are discovering things that they can eat and finding the things that will poison them, right? There's actually certain adaptations that help with that. You guys know that some things taste bitter to you, right? Or have certain odors that turn you off. Frequently they're telling you, don't eat that, right? We can actually learn to like certain bitter things. Anybody like black coffee? Right? How about IPAs or like extreme, the extreme ales? Yeah. Did you like it the very first time you tried either of those? The very first sip of black coffee or the very first, 100 IBU beer you had?
No.
Was it? Probably not, right? It's an acquired taste. The first sip there is an adaptation telling you, oh, this could be poisonous because many, toxic plants are bitter. You see how this works here? People had to experiment along the way, and we developed certain attractions to certain food items and phobias from certain other ones, right? But people are gathering. Who's doing most of the gathering?
Women.
Women do most of the gathering, right? So they're gathering during the day, right? So what are the men doing then? Hunting, right? Hunting is far less efficient. You might spend days or weeks tracking an animal and catch nothing, right? Or you might spend weeks tracking a group of gazelle and catch one, all right? You bring that sucker back and it's like feast time and everyone eat tons of stuff here and then you don't have it for a long time, all right? So it's spaced out, but it's a burst of additional calories, right? Helps us get a little fat too. We pack on because we overeat for a while and then the body can attack that and and burn that extra energy that you've stored. Cool there? So there's a feast and famine cycle that hunter-gatherers always have. You have lots of food, relatively little food. Most of the caloric intake, though, on a consistent basis is coming from women, right? Overall, it's about 50-50. So men and women both work, and they both provide equally to the survival of the group. You see how this works here? So there is actually no, we don't have like a sexism or a patriarchy. Men are not in charge in prehistory. There is no rational reason for men to dominate women because they depend upon women to survive. Right? That's an issue we're going to come back to today. Right? So we got two things here. I want to hit another concern here because we're going to come back to this in a little bit here. First off, though, what about kids? Where do they fit in? If all the women have to go for food and all the men have to go hunting, who takes care of the kids?
They contribute also?
Yeah, but the smallest ones can't. You're going to train them from as early as they can. So the little kids learning here, and you're teaching them how to throw a stick. You're eventually going to take them along on trips with you, or the kids will go along with the women. But you can't take a toddler and expect them to work, right? So someone has to take care of them, right? The older, the sick, the injured, right? My leg's broken. I can't go hunting today, but I can teach you guys how to make a spear, right? And I'm doing that. The kids are raised collectively. There are no nuclear families in prehistory, right? Bands are relatively small. You know everybody. You're looking 30 to 150 people at most, right? Bands have to be relatively small, and the kids are raised collectively. Hunter-gatherer lifestyle is very, very different from the way that you guys live and the way that we're used to understanding things, but that is most of the time that our species has existed. Right? So we have a lot of psychological adaptations to this kind of lifestyle that complicate things in the modern world, in our modern way of living. Cool there? We'll hit a couple of those today here. Now, the other reason to start off with this, I'm going to give you this longer stretch here, thinking about 200,000 years as a species living pretty much the same way here. Our major cultural differences first begin to show up only 20,000 years ago, at most. Right? And the vast majority of our major cultural differences only go back a few thousand years. Right? Until about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, people in China and people in West Africa lived exactly the same way, had the same basic cultures, the same basic approach to life. There are very few differences between the way they thought of the world. When they started settling in one place permanently instead of moving, they began adapting to specific chunks of land. Right? And developing specific traditions around that chunk of land, right? And that begins a process of cultural divergence. See what I'm getting in here? So most of these major cultural differences that we have around the world here are of relatively recent origin, only because of the process of settlement. Now, settlement does take a long time. I don't spend much time in a survey class here talking about the Palaeolithic period. I have an upper division course in the ancient world that isn't done here, obviously, where I spend a lot more time on things like this. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about as revolutionary in the Neolithic period are revolutionary in their effects, but they're really evolutionary because of how long they took to appear. The first experiments in settlement actually go way back into the Paleolithic period. Attempts to stick around in one place for a few weeks or a few months at a time. The first tentative experiments with raising a certain plant. Somebody noticed if they dropped a seed in a certain place at a certain time, something happened. So they said, let's stick around and see what happens, man. I think this is going to grow. This is going to be good, right? And you're experimenting a little bit, but it's not enough to live on, right? So you start, heading toward the first we can call horticulturalist societies, people who do small amounts of agriculture and mix it in with hunting and gathering, right? It's a long process of learning. By the time we get to what we call the Neolithic, the new Stone Age, and differentiate that from the Paleolithic, the old Stone Age, all of those innovations have finally taken off. And we have enough to settle permanently and stop wandering. That's what separates them. Right? The dividing line between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic is permanent settlement, right? Not temporary settlement. Right? One of the things that will help us along here, and again, taking kind of like long view, and I think this is just a particularly fun topic to throw in here because you'll notice throughout this whole term that I again throw in tons of memes, some old, some new, many that I make up, but I use the silly, graphics and whatnot here. That's not actually what meme means originally. A meme is something catching, something that you can remember and pass on from person to person, right? So it got reused here for these cute little graphics with different text on them because the picture, a certain image, is the meme itself. Everyone recognizes this certain image, and you can write whatever you want on it. Do you see what I'm getting at here? The concept of memes was developed in the 1970s as a way to try and explain the cultural evolution. How do ideas develop in the first place and pass from person to person? And it was done by analogy to genes, right? The way genes fight to pass themselves on, to reproduce, to drive you to, the gene says, I must have sex and reproduce, right? The gene wants to reproduce itself. Yeah, sort of metaphorically, this is again not literal, ideas don't think, right? But metaphorically, ideas try to do the same thing. They want to survive. They want to pass from person to person, be propagated and spread around. A bad idea is not very successful. Think of that in terms of natural selection. Some ideas are worse than others, right? Wearing clown suits to work would be a bad idea, right? So if I tried that, it wouldn't work, right? There are certain things you can do and certain things you can't do, right? A good idea like the spear, right? That's a cool idea, man. Show me how to make one of those. And the spear took off as a meme. You see how this works here? And I'm using this as a way to describe a lot of these early innovations because tons of elements of culture you can really think of in memetic terms. Religion is a meme, for example. And I don't mean this to suggest that religion isn't real or true or whatever. I'm not trying to touch on anybody's particular religious views here, but the basic idea of the religion is, metaphorically speaking, you can imagine it as a kind of virus of the mind. You infect people with it. You pass it on to your kids. You pass it on to other people. Excuse me, sir, have you heard the truth of, et cetera, right? And you pass it on a certain idea. And if it sounds like a cool idea, it catches on, and you adopt it, right? And along the way, they change and adapt. Every new person who takes in an idea processes it a little bit differently, right? Their own particular background and what they already knew, and it might get passed on slightly differently. Right? So there's this constant process of cultural development. So we can think of everything from the idea of spearfishing all the way up to complex cultural ideas like the burial of dead and divination and magic. All these things that we can come up with here are all ideas that get passed from person to person. I used to think the things like the bow and arrow have been around forever. It's really not that old an idea, right? But these ideas get picked up and sort of passed around. So, here is one of the reasons we need to touch upon this as an idea. I want to deal with something that makes us fundamentally different from other critters. We've already seen the reason. Y'all got fantastically big brains, right? When you leave the house in the morning, your dog doesn't know if it will ever see you again. You are effectively already dead and gone. When you come home, oh my God, they came back. Oh, I'm so happy, right? That dog's so happy. They actually tell you when you first get a dog, don't make a big deal out of leaving because that'll make them more anxious, right? Because for the dog, everything has to be present in the moment, right? You're not there, and they suddenly they think that they're abandoned, right? If you make it look like it's just a normal thing that you leave and come back and you'll always come back, then they won't be as anxious about it. Because when they see you, everything changes, right? Humans are able to think in long term. You know you're coming back, right? You know mom's coming back from the store, or you hope she does, right? But that makes more sense to us. There are a lot of things that the brain gives you. One of those is certain questions. We start asking questions about life that other animals don't ask. We start wondering, what is the point of wasting a perfectly good evening? It's evening here. You guys could be at home just chilling, having a beer with your friends, whatever, watching TV or something. Why the heck are you sitting in a college classroom listening to some hairy guy babble on about antiquity, right? Why are you here? What's the point of learning all this crap? Because you know that at some point you're going to die, right? How is this useful? What's the point of it all? All right? At some point in everyone's life, you start thinking about that. Most people don't think about it when they're 20, but by the time you get to 40 or 50, you will start wondering, what is my legacy? What have I accomplished? What will I leave behind? What was the point of my life? What does it all mean? Right? Because we're able to think in these longer spans here, right? And you guys know that this meat deteriorates over time. We do get older. We do get infirm. We do eventually die. And that presents a problem for humans. Now, all cultures have to grapple with this. Some develop religious traditions that give them a sense of an afterlife. The life goes on after death. There's a way that the consciousness survives. Others do not, right? But they all have to give you a sense of meaning and purpose, right? The desire for purpose and meaning is as human gets. It's fundamental to what makes us human in the first place. Cool there? These questions are there and they're present. This is why we can see these higher animals. Can somebody grab the door, actually? It's a little loud. The burial of dead is a fundamentally human thing, right? And of course, human, not necessarily Homo sapiens. We do have evidence of Neanderthals doing it. Other species may have, but the remains are much smaller. It's harder to tell. But we do this. Even other highly intelligent animals do not. Think about elephants, for example. Elephants are really smart, right? If an elephant is injured or sick, the other elephants will move around it and help it out. If one is kind of stuck and can't get out, another elephant will go in and push it and help it out. They care about each other. They're very aware of each other, and they have good memories, right? But when an elephant dies, the other elephants just keep walking. Bob's dead. Bye, Bob. And they go. They may be sad. They might grieve because they have emotions, right? Emotions are, again, fundamental to brains. Right? The thing that separates you from other animals is a matter of degree, not of kind. Right? Your dog does have emotions, your dog does think, just on a much simpler level than you. All right? The elephant may be sad, but it's not going to do anything about it because what's the point? You see what I'm kind of getting here? We care. We attach a significance to life and death that other animals do not. Right? So we develop certain rituals about it. Take a look at this shape right here. What do you see here?
Two buried people?
Yeah. Do you think they died like that? Chances of dying exactly like that are pretty slim, right? These bodies were intentionally positioned together in each other's arms, looking into each other's eyes, sort of embracing, right? This is a couple buried together. Right? Take a step back. Look at the figure in the upper right. Can you tell what it is now? Might not have been obvious before, was it?
Two people.
It's two people. Again, legs entwined, arms entwined, looking into each other's eyes. That's from a burial, right? That's an early religious figurine about, again, the significance of life and death. Right? This is something that all of our ancestors have to think about. I told you I'd give you an example of the way historical narratives can change, our understanding can change. We used to think that complex religious traditions developed once people settled in one place. That we went from villages to towns to big cities, and as more and more people got together, you needed to have systems of social control. So you have the priesthood developed certain rituals and ideas, and because temples were heavily involved in early economies, the temples actually controlled the economies in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt, right? So you need this as basically a social issue. So we thought the religion developed because of civilization, because of being in cities. Cool there? Turns out, it's the other way around. This site here, the reason I played a Turkish musician during the break too, this site here, Gubeck is in modern Turkey. It's a site that was built 11,000 years ago by a hunter-gatherer band. The people who built this did not have permanent residence. They did not have agriculture yet, right? They were literally hunter-gatherers, right? And they would, on their yearly migrations, stop for a while in one place, right? They're eating the berries they managed to fill up in a bag, and they're going through that, and they're chipping stone, and they're working on this site, and then once it's finished, they can come around on their yearly rotations and stop here and perform rituals for a while, and then they have to take off again once the food runs out, right? This site is literally twice as old as the oldest city on the planet. Think about that for a second. Right? It took another 5,000 years to reach the point of having cities. And here we have a complex monolithic stone structure, right? And you can see highly elaborate carvings, right? These giant basalt monoliths here. This thing is taller than this wall is, right? With animals carved in relief along the side here. This took a lot of work. And this forced a reevaluation. It forced us to ask certain questions, right? Which historians then did in conjunction with anthropologists, evolutionary psychologists. Lots of people got involved in this whole dispute here. We started to figure out what's going on here, how did this work out, in order to come up with another explanation. Right? And what we're really kind of getting at here is an answer to some fundamental questions about religion. Religion is expensive. Let's just deal with that right out of the bag. It's a difficult process. If you are, for example, a hunter-gatherer band, and you are going to stop and chip stone for a few weeks or a month or whatever here until your food runs out, and then you start moving again, right? Because you have to. What happens if, I don't know, there was a drought, or another band came through and picked all the bushes clean, right? You die. You see how this works? A hunter-gatherer band moves constantly for a reason, right? Because they need to keep moving to find enough wild food to sustain the band, right? By stopping in one place, you're taking a huge risk. It could kill you all. And the risk factor goes on and on throughout our history. Think of the amount of emotional investment that goes into religious traditions, right? The commitments people have to them. You can see that still as a reason that people fight each other, right? You're going to hell, I must kill you, blah, blah, blah. There's sort of like you can paint people as the enemy from this, right? Or you can think of how much we spend on it still. Everyone's contributing. You go into your synagogue or mosque or church or whatever, you contribute part of your income to help out overall, right? You think of the massive cathedrals built in the Middle Ages in Europe, right? It's expensive to be involved in this sort of thing, right? So the question we had to figure out here to answer is, why do it? What value is there in it? Anybody have a thought there? What do you think our early ancestors got out of it?
Gives meaning to life.
It answers that question of meaning. That's the key issue there. Right? First big step here, it gives us a way to understand this. If I can have a sort of common idea, we all have a particular myth that gives us a certain sense of hope or an ideal there that can answer basic questions. Why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? Right? So that's a good answer there. Our ancestors probably had that going back much farther than this. Much, much farther. Right? What else are we starting to get? By the time we're really distinguishing them, by the time we're starting to build complex monolithic architecture, this actually is another site here. I think this one was found in Malta. This is quite not quite as old, but also much older than civilizations. We continue to find sites like this since Göbekli Tepe. What else can we get out of that? Think about the fact that if a particular group of people share an idea, what if we all have the same myth? What does it give us as a group?
Power, identity.
Identity.
Community.
A sense of community, right? It bonds us together, right? If there's a lion coming after me, I'm much more likely to throw myself in between the path and stop the lion to let you escape if we have something in common, right? And we're not all going to be in the same family, right? But if we're the same community, if we've bonded together over a set of ideas, a cultural ideal here, we will sacrifice for each other. We're really close to a Marine base, so I'll give you a nice military example. Think about the way military training tries to make you a band of brothers, right? Somebody throws a grenade in the window, what's going to happen?
Someone's going to jump on it.
Someone's jumping on that grenade, right? The person jumping on that grenade knows he's going to die, right? So in a practical terms, he's just committed suicide. But that's not why he's doing it. Why did he do it?
Says
My brothers.
That's right, his brothers, right? We have adopted him. We have joined a tribe. We have developed a common bond, right? And myth and religion can give us that. It can bring us together. Cool there? That's the key shift here, and why this is really sort of helpful here. Because even though it can be expensive in the short run, even though it can be risky, even though it costs a lot, even though it can kill an individual, it pays off for the group as a whole, right? So collectively, we prosper more through these senses of common identity, through these tribal identities, right? In a sense here, religious traditions helped to build complex society in the first place. They actually helped to build our more complex cultures. Now, religions are often looked at a little bit differently today than they are in the ancient world, and we'll come back to this a whole bunch of times going forward in the next couple of weeks here. Ancient mythic traditions and polytheistic traditions have a very different approach to life. There's a different aesthetic to them. Oftentimes the ritual is much more important than the beliefs, right? Belief is much more functional, right? It's much more pragmatic, right? For one thing, you often see direct contradictions that do not matter. Some cultures had multiple conflicting creation accounts and no one cared, because the creation account has a particular purpose. It tells a particular story. Right? I sometimes play a little video clip that's relevant to this. I might start with that next time, or we can do it at the very end if it squeezes in here. But you can build something out of these. Each one has a particular material lesson that it contributes, right? Some kind of value that you can pass on to another generation here. Ancient religions, whether we're talking about the evidence we have of prehistory and all the way through for the first few thousand years of settlement, religion is pragmatic. It's practical by definition. If I sacrifice to a god, I'm getting something in return. I'm not doing it just because I like to do, right? I'm doing it because there's something transactional here. Right? I want to take the long trip from on foot from Rome down to Capua. I can be robbed along the way here. This is scary for me, so I'm going to sacrifice to Jupiter before I leave because he's going to protect me on the trip. Right? I'm in Mesopotamia and it floods regularly, and that's scary, and I don't want that to flood. I do not want something to happen there, so I'm going to sacrifice to Enki and hope that he will keep the seas at bay and keep the rivers from overflowing. Right? There's a fear involvement there. You give them something that's expensive to you that hurts you in return for something. The idea of sacrifice is a useful one to get there, and I can probably get just a little 60-second definition here for sacrifice as an idea. Does anyone remember the Cain and Abel story from your Bible? You ever do Bible study or Sunday school? So Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's kids. They both sacrifice to God, right? What's the difference between their two sacrifices?
one sacrifice, if I'm correct, one sacrificed the other to God?
No, that part there is a murder involved, but it's not a ritual murder. It's a resentment murder, right? Remember the difference between them?
Cain's wasn't as big as Abel's. Abel sacrificed more.
Cain's sacrifice was a produce, right? And Abel's sacrifice was an animal. Right? They were different types of sacrifices. They're both what they made, they're both what they produced, and they both gave something up, so there's a value to it. Why is the animal more expensive? Why is the animal more valuable?
It takes more to bring it up?
It takes longer, yeah. The animal is going to eat food that I could eat. I'm growing produce, right? Produce grows much faster. I might, my crop of tomatoes is going to show up here in just a couple of weeks or whatever. It's going to start growing up very fast there. Within a couple of months, I can pick them all and eat them, right? Whereas my goat is going to grow for like 3 years before I can eat him. And all along the way, he's going to be eating stuff that I could eat, right? So the animal is more expensive. A sacrifice has to hurt, right? That's the key issue there, right? And it's always, again, there's a purpose to it. You're expecting to get something for it. I can use this to start shifting us here to a discussion of sexuality we're going to get to. Fertility is a major early concern for human religions. Right? This particular figurine here is about 23,000 years old. This one was dug up in Germany. We have examples of this from quite a few different parts of the world that we found, all relatively similar. With the differences in basic construction here, but the idea is similar. Take a look at the image. I want to see if you guys can interpret this image as if it's like a primary source. I'm giving you a little assignment here. What do you see here? What stands out? Give me a feature. What do you first notice about it? What do you notice?
Female body.
Okay, it's female, right? So first one, let's check things off the list. Female, done. What else do we notice?
Does it have a face?
There's no face. Yeah, look, totally faceless. It's just a band of little, just little beads around there. So it's not a person. It's not intended to represent a god or an individual. This isn't mom, right? This is an idea. It's an ideal of femininity. No face, female body, ideal of femininity. This is just a female ideal. Okay, so we got one step forward. What's the next thing we notice here? What do we see here?
Large breasts.
Very large.
Nutrition.
What was that?
For nutrition.
Ah, good. We got an immediate connection there. Large breasts, right? And there is a connection made in people's minds that larger breasts make it easier to feed young. This is one of the reasons that human females actually have larger breasts than any other mammal species here, because it's a bit of sexual selection. Men consciously chose to mate with them. It's actually a mistake. There's no difference at all in the mammary glands and what a woman with small breasts and a large breast can produce in terms of milk, right? The larger breast is nothing but fat. It's a fat bag. They're just, people have fun with them, they're enjoyable fat bags, but they're just fat bags, right? But it's a myth, and part of that myth comes out of a reproductive concern, right? I'm a hunter-gatherer. I'm moving around all the time, and we've been hunter-gatherers, for 2 million years in East Africa, right? Wandering around, with our early hominids, right? And the food supplies are kind of like scarce, and you got to make sure, like, we've gone through feast and famine periods. Sometimes there's food, sometimes there isn't. If there's not enough food and you have tiny young, the tiny young aren't eating regular food. They're consuming breast milk, right? And naturally here, humans actually consume breast milk for the first several years of their life, not for the first few months or a year. You would continue to do it for a number of years, right? It's the most nutritious thing for young children, right? So you're consuming breast milk. So what happens if there's not enough food?
Starvation.
You starve, and the first people to die are the infants, right? They're the most vulnerable, right? So my concern then in reproduction is to pick somebody that I think has has ample milk supply, right? Is more likely to be able to feed the young through these famine periods, right? So have that in mind, and tell me something else that stands out about this woman.
Some missing arms.
Oh, okay. So the missing arms are like the face. Again, it's not significant to its purpose.
Yeah, like somebody said, she's a little bit chunkier.
Yeah, come on. Let's. We're all being very polite about this. This woman is clearly overweight, right? She is somewhat plump, right? Why is that a good thing?
Fat storage.
Fat storage. She's clearly eating well. She is clearly well fed. They have not had famines. They've not had droughts. There's ample food. She's been packing it on here. And you pack on the extra fat. This is the reason that humans are able to store, extra carbohydrates and whatnot here. Because when there's no food, that's how you survive. The body starts attacking and cannibalizing those extra fat cells to produce the energy to keep you going, right? So what this says is not only has she been well fed, she's much more likely to be able to carry children and have them survive infancy. Right? Because she's overweight, she will be able to support her children for those first few years of their lives right? Whereas a skinny woman, you might worry if there's a drought or something, she's much more likely to die. Do you see what I'm kind of looking at? The kids are going to die, they think. Do you see what we can sort of draw from this sort of object here? This is clearly a fertility icon, right? It's simply all about the question of fertility, right? And everything about this tells us something about the lifestyle here of a hunter-gatherer band, thinking in terms of food insecurity. All right, so moving along here, let's make a few comments here about sexuality in general. Now, there's a few basic concerns I want to get across here about differences between human sexuality in a hunter-gatherer period here, in prehistory versus us. In a hunter-gatherer band, the population is quite small, right? So you've got 30 to 150 people sort of moving around together, right? Interacting, all sharing responsibilities, all working together. Hunter-gatherer bands, generally, if they're reproductively successful, have to practice things like infanticide because the population can't exceed how much food there is. Right? You do have to keep the population around the right size, right? And you're all sticking around together and you're all working together. And again, children are raised collectively. There's no actual nuclear family, which means one thing right off the top here, no one really cares who the father is of a given child because it's not your boy, it's everyone's boy. Right? The kids they belong to the band, they belong to the tribe. Right? And multiple pairings actually provide certain advantages to the band in that sense. Right? If you have 2 lovers or 3 lovers within the band, and they have 2 lovers or 3 lovers, guess what? We're all sleeping with each other. Right? And we all have a better reason to cooperate, to work together, to trust each other, right? The question here is, in our society here, people often like fight over relationships and whatnot here because sex is a scarce resource, right? It's not a scarce resource here because there's no need to protect it, right? The fact that there's no property to leave to a particular child and it's not your child means no one really cares. It's everyone's anyway, so you don't need to control this. See what I'm getting at as basic idea? Human beings are not biologically monogamous. We are socially monogamous, right? And you can see tons of evidence for that even in our contemporary culture, the way we sort of, the way things sort of like work out here. If, for example, 2 penguins fall for each other, they will never look at another penguin again. Right, they're done. They're paired. That's my girl, and you're always together. Right. You can love your partner to the ends of the earth, be so super in love, And again, whether you're male or female, at some point you're gonna notice somebody else, aren't you? Right. You're just gonna be sitting there. Damn, he's hot. Right. It's just gonna occur to you. Right. That is basically a cue to the way that we're naturally wired, right? Think about people who spend their entire lives chasing that in-love feeling. I can give you a little bit of long-term relationship advice here. When you fall for somebody, that good, I love this person, I love everything about this person, that chemical high, I'm addicted to this person here, that's going to last from 3 months to 18 months at the outer edge, right? It's always going to fade. Every single person, it'll fade, right? You never stay that way. People who chase that in-love feeling, right? Maybe this person wasn't the one, always chasing after that high, will never be happy. In the time that you've got that, you need to build intimacy, spend time talking, learn to love each other as people, right? Because you'll always have each other here. You're always going to be connected as people, right? And we pair bond. We do pair bond. When you make out with somebody, when you have sex with somebody, you're releasing hormones in the brain, things like oxytocin and whatnot here, that make you want to be with that person again, that connect you to them, right? But pair bonding is not the same as monogamy. You can establish multiple pair bonds. You can see that just even in people who are not, who are monogamous. If they're in a relationship, that relationship breaks up, what do? They move on to another relationship, don't they? We have a phenomenon we call serial monogamy, right? You are still able to form new pair bonds, aren't you? You see what that is? That's again a legacy of this earlier lifestyle here where multiple consistent pair bonds could have been maintained. You see, we can spend a ton of time talking about this topic here, but it's not really necessary. I need to lay out this here because we're going to introduce a significant difference in the Neolithic. And I got to push forward a little bit here. The Neolithic period. there are a number of like significant shifts. Right? We call this a revolution, right? It actually takes a very long time, but it's revolutionary in its effects. The Neolithic Revolution is primarily based around agriculture, settling in one place and domesticating animals, right? Plants and animals together, making them sort of work together. We can take it back a little under 10,000 years ago in places like the Near East, to see definitive permanent settlements. It starts happening at different periods all around the world. It's reproduced over and over and over again. So it does not start in one place and spread everywhere. It does spread from those. So the agriculture that developed in the Near East is how agriculture got to Northern Europe, right? It diffused to there. But it's not how it got to China or South Asia, right? We have it follows a similar pattern here. Men noticed certain friendlier animals and brought them back with them, right? This animal wasn't as scared of me, so I'm going to take him home and breed out with another animal that seemed kind of friendly and keep only the friendliest of the young, and you're selectively breeding them to domesticate the animal. Women gathering noticed certain plants, certain seed strains that they could reproduce by dropping them in certain places at certain times, right? And we start moving from there. This leads to a massive boom in population because food is suddenly consistent. We can get tons of it very easily. Right? The human population starts skyrocketing this period here, but the lifespan actually declines for many people because living close together increases the amount of disease that you're exposed to. It also gives you a much more bland diet. Right? If you lived in ancient Mesopotamia, your diet consisted of bread, cheese, bread, goat, cheese, bread, and lots of beer along the way. Pretty much, you have an extremely unvaried diet, right? It's not very nutritious, right? So it actually adversely affects health. But because far more kids survive, right, in the first place, because there's so much extra food, I don't have to practice infanticide as much, right? And because I'm farming, I want larger families to work that land, right? So the population does shoot up anyway, right? And that gets us to, I'm going to leave this for a second, get back to the minute. I want to tie us into that shift here in sexuality, right? Let's think about land for just a second here. That back wall is a river, right? And all this is land in between. You with me here so far? Do I want to be farming where the gentlemen here in the back row are? Do I want to farm right there? You want to farm right next to the river, do you think?
Yes.
Yes.
The water, you got an easy water supply, right? What happens if the river floods, though?
Wipes out everything.
By food. You see the risk there? Right by the river, easy access to water, but risky, right? Do I want to farm all the way over here, though? No, because now I got to carry the water, right? The river's never going to flood this far, but now I got a complex irrigation problem, right? So where I want to be is in the sweet spot, right? So you're in the sweet spot, you are, right? So you guys have the most valuable real estate in the room. See the issue here? Now, what happens in the Neolithic period with settlement in one place is the people that settle on that land need to protect it, right? And that's where the subjection of women comes in. What people determined was for me to produce a bunch of my own kids who will fight for my land and work my land and inherit my land, once I've introduced this idea of property, of land as property, right? I need to build my own little dynasty. What's the best way to do that? I need to control some poor woman's sexuality, right? If I can convince her to sleep with no one else but me and only me forever, right? If I can start introducing all kinds of taboos, all kinds of laws, all kinds of ways to sort of teach them never sleep with anybody else, only me, right? And keep her somehow sequestered and she can produce my children, right? Then I know who's inheriting the land because suddenly there is something to pass on. Personal property is different from private property. If I've got an awesome spear, and somebody's going to inherit that, right? But it's still just a spear. A chunk of agricultural land is far more valuable, right? And the desire to hold that and pass it on, right, sort of takes off here. So what we see is every single time humans settle, patriarchies develop. This tells us two things. One, patriarchy is not natural or biological, right? it is a cultural adaptation, and 2, it's something we can deal with. Right? It's something that can be addressed there. It has a specific tie to private property and to property ownership. And you can see this over and over again in ancient records. Biggest concerns here over like marriage and children and whatnot is always about property and inheritance. Right? Somebody being cuckolded has significant legal ramifications. Right? Somebody can say like later, "Oh, that was really my son," right? Because I slept with her, and I get to inherit that land. Right? And they want to avoid questions like that. Cool there? The other thing, the thing I'll kind of like leave you on so we can get out of here, is one other thing that develops everywhere we go through the Neolithic Revolutions. Every single place where people settle. You have a greater specialization in labor. There's a few examples that are in here if you're interested. Right? People go through and develop certain crafts. Right? We have the earliest textiles. We don't know exactly how far back because it deteriorates in the soil, but we do have textiles going back 8,000 years. We have tons of pottery going back that far. We have the earliest metallurgy going back that far. But what this does is it allows societies to develop much more hierarchically than they ever had before. People dividing up to do different jobs does not necessarily give anyone power over someone else or authority over someone else. The concept of law did not exist before permanent settlement. Once you have 5,000 people living together, it makes sense to start developing laws and social order and someone to enforce that. So I'm going to start, setting up an entire class of people who are enforcers of laws. You see how this works out here? In smaller bands, this was never necessary before. So the other feature that you see every time people settle, right? The societies become patriarchal. They also become hierarchical, right? They develop social classes. There are haves and have-nots, people who own lots of good land and people who don't. Cool there? So that's where we're going to leave off here in terms of basic themes. We are going, here's a little summary of some of the basic features we see in the Neolithic. We're going to be picking up here with Mesopotamia and the Egyptians on Wednesday, and we'll start to see some of these things in practice. We'll look at some of the changes as people do settle, when we can look at like really concrete examples of things going forward. Did that sign-up sheet make it around? Okay, cool. So I will see you guys all on Wednesday in Mesopotamia. Have a lovely evening.